Thanks for joining our next session here. I'll introduce this myself. My name is James Stellpflug. I'm the SVP of Customer Success for the Americas for EVS. And the session we're going to talk about here is talking about routing, when it is much more than just a router. And joining me today, I've invited my longtime industry friend, Steve Rittenberg from MLB. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Rittenberg. I'm Senior Director of Engineering at NAB Network, just across the river in Secaucus. I think most of you kind of know who we are. We producing a variety of games throughout the year, also shows within the facility itself. James and I have known each other going back prior to my MLB days, so long history.
Exactly. So we've been a part of a lot of different facilities, a lot of different production domains all around the U.S. and things for many, many years. And for those of you who don't know EVS, we're a manufacturer of software, hardware, technologies that help to serve the live production domains around the industry. So the discussion today, I'm going to jump ahead. The main thing we wanted to talk about here is talking about today's facilities. What are the different challenges going on in the industry today? And Steve, what I wanted to talk about here is, while EVS has been part of building production tools, we serve all the replay systems for all the biggest sport events around the world. When we talk about facilities, especially broadcast centers, the challenges are not the same as what they were for the last 20 years, where you built a monolithic facility, serving one video format, dealing with one video standard of SDI. I think the challenges we're talking about in facilities today is one that is starting to eclipse and outpace the ability to keep up with it. So what are those things when we talk about building and thinking about a facility?
Right, so as James pointed out, typically you'd have your one codec or your one raster you're always dealing with, which was great when everything's just being 720, which, MLB Network, we work at 720 for everything. But over the past few years, we've been asked and we've been required to start moving 1080p 60 around the facility, handling UHD, HDR. Fortunately, we haven't changed frame rates yet, but we know it's something that could happen. So the challenge in that monolithic approach has been your facility is built for a raster, a format. Trying to add other formats in and moving those around the facility becomes challenging on that design. We have been able to make adjustments and move things around so that way we can move 1080p throughout, but it's also very discrete paths of saying, if you want to see 1080p 60, you can only go to these half dozen locations. You can't see it everywhere. So what we wrestle with, and this past season especially, is how do we position ourselves for the future to be able to handle a variety of formats and basically make the facility more or less signal agnostic, so we can do all of that in a kind of like a holistic approach. And then going a step farther is all the different layers of management of these systems. You have tools from every vendor. How do I manage all this together? So between the formats, the rasters, moving those around, monitoring those, evaluating those, and managing all of that at one time becomes exceptionally difficult these days as broadcasters, as the customer and the consumer wants more.
And I think as we're talking about facilities, also I think the driving factors of what causes those problems is also a big change now. Is that before you knew about a new project, you knew that you had to build a studio, a control room, you had to serve a production need that might have been planned out for 3 years or 4 years that you were going to launch something. But I'm seeing the pace of change rapidly increase right now, where you may not know today in October what someone may be looking to do in December or January this year, or even less. So now your needs are of production's demand, of what a facility might look like, what a back-end infrastructure needs to serve is not known weeks or months in advance, and that's a big challenge.
Yeah, it's very challenging where the being agile is so key these days on being able to support everybody's needs at once. From an engineering side, from the integration, we're always building out for what may happen, knowing ahead of time or predicting what someone's going to want. Putting enough resources in for those other aspects. How do you prepare for the unknown and what production doesn't even know they want yet? So on the engineering side is preparing for that and making sure that we have the proper tools to support the unknown. which I think, across all industries, everyone runs into these challenges, but it seems to every year more and more of it, and as you're successful doing it, the timeline on doing it gets shorter and shorter.
So I missed the 1990s where you knew exactly what you wanted to do. You planned for 6 years ahead of time.
Yep.
It was a standard definition world. It was great back then.
Yeah.
So again, these production challenges are there. The fact that they don't know what they need to do. So
Yep.
you have to plan the design of a facility with the unknown. Then on top of it, as you get going with these things, the byproduct of those impacts mean you built out a facility that now you have disparate choices that had to be made year on year that now your engineering staff have to cope with, as you said, different interfaces, different configurations, different things that have organically been served the facility. So on an engineering layer, that becomes a nightmare of what they got to cope with, right?
Yeah, it's the organic growth. Someone's like, oh, it's organic, it's great, how everything just grows and grows and grows. But the challenge, though, from the engineers on the back end is, I have a team of support engineers that are in that facility at all hours, and they need to know all these different tools. They need to be aware of all these different systems, and to be able to support all of them effectively becomes very challenging. Trying to make a universal approach to those support, so that way our engineers can effectively support and efficiently support. And production wants more. You're doing simultaneous productions now, and everyone's being pulled more and more, and there's just being more asked. So looking for that common layer to manage what you're doing. That's where we're looking to get to.
And so for that, that's where EVS, we wanted to talk about this today because facility challenges are huge. These needs are outpacing the ability to plan for and implement this. And when you start having many different physical routers or many different organic growth around the facility and all of this infrastructure around it, you need better ways to be able to cope with that. So maybe if I just throw a slide on the screen that talks about it, EVS as a company is something that probably most of you out here are not familiar with hearing the name EVS and thinking about infrastructure. And so for us, this is a new category for the EVS portfolio called Media Infra, where this is in this category of helping to solve the media processing, helping to serve this complexity about the infrastructure that you guys are faced with and the challenges that emerge out of that. So for EVS, we know these problems you're talking about, and I think this is a layer that we're really happy when we can help you bring an overarching control layer and visibility as to what you need to do. So for at EVS, we have a lot of the different tools to help serve this purpose, and we invite you to come to our booth and learn more about it. But as we talk about these control layers, I think when you start thinking about engineering users and that complexity, we talk now about adding control layers on top of it. We talk about bringing the right tool at the right place. It may not always be from EVS. It might be other ingredients in the infrastructure. So what does that mean when you guys start planning your things out in the next layer is that you're trying to figure out what do you buy and how do you plan for that unknown?
Right. We're not of the belief that you're going to find a single vendor that has every piece and part that you need to run your facility and manage it, but to find something to look for something that can work with a variety of vendors and be very compatible. That would be the nice thing. Is that way it's kind of like the dream. It's all together, working as one environment without a lot of the other challenges. So it's going to be a variety of vendors. It's not going to be the single, as James pointed out. It's not just EVS. Like we have their replay servers, sure, but there's other products too.
So I think one view we always tend to have, and the discussion, the title of this session was when routing is not just the router. We're not just talking about buying a router and putting it in to solve a problem. We're talking about how do you bring a logical layer to bring everything under control. How do you add a layer on top of your existing routers? How do you bring something that solves the complexity of configuring many, many different parts? So oftentimes, I think from an American side, I tend to say we've seen huge growth of this category in Europe, but for whatever reason in America, we tend to have a lot of facilities built with a router with only the kind of integrated control software that's part of the separate router. So when you look at the facility, your engineers have to go to many different places to figure out where the problem is. So
so whether it's the support of the router, support of frame syncs, the encoders, decoders, our acquisitions areas, so many different tool sets that are used across all the environments. it's as we mentioned before, it's challenging for the engineer to support all of that, and we'll talk about it amongst the engineering manager group to ask the support group to know every single thing is challenging, but if we get to that one layer that can just oversee it and kind of give you that window into the whole environment to support it, to configure other frame syncs, whoever's that is, other encoders and decoders, rather than, I have to go to what decoder link is that, and having a list of bookmarks in Chrome of like, all right, where am I going for this one, where am I going for that one, and instead of having that one spot to go to be able to manage all of that would be so much, everyone's not in their head. Yes, I'd love to see that. And we talk about it, like myself, my group within me, with my group that I manage. So we'd love to get there. It's kind of that like the utopia of a router, if you would.
Everything's perfect. Everything's fine.
No one calls me. There's no problems. Everything. All lights are green.
But isn't that the real what we need to strive for? And it's obtainable from our side. That's why EVS is up here on stage talking about it. Is the fact that the best routing infrastructure you have is where you can hide the complexity from the users, and you can just get them back to production. They can just use the system, and your engineers have the right tools to manage it. But you can change out different pieces of the engine behind the scenes and not make that a liability to the production users. So for us, that is our Cerebrum layer that we can add on top of your existing infrastructure to give you control. And for those of you looking at your badges here, if you flip to the backside of your actual NAB credential, you'll see on the backside of that the EVS Strata routing solution. So that's when you combine a control layer with an IP fabric and processing to being a next generation of routing platform. So really, depending on whether you just need to bring simplicity to your facility or you need to completely start changing out for a new way of thinking for routing, EVS is now a name that a lot of you need to think about as something you would not have turned to in the past. So for you guys at MLB, I mean, is that really the layer that keeps you up most at night?
The disparate layers, yes, that's the challenge. It's if we can get to that universal, one layer that I can dive into for multi-viewer configuration, for tally updates, UMDs. Instead of having, you've got to go to this application. Oh, that's not installed on that machine. We don't have access to that.
Or find the right engineer that knows how to configure that one piece because he's a specialist in that one UI.
Right, and or that UI is slightly different. How do I do it in this one? And having that universal view, that one view for everything, which you've seen on your phones. Like, all right, every iPhone or every Android phone more or less looks the same. You know where to go. If we can get to that similar thing in the routing environment, it would be great. Then we have one place to go and everyone knows, you go here for that. So that'd be nice. So
control systems are that one layer that I think, as I mentioned before, in the Americas, you don't see a lot of value that's been understood in that category for years past. But now I'm happy when I see certain clients who are being exposed to Cerebrum from EVS, and they really see the fact that this solves those problems that have been latent for years that just no one really thought about how do I actually fix that. And the tools have been laying there, but it's just not an American thing to use that type of category. So control systems.
Control systems, yes. It's the holy grail.
And I think long gone are those days where you're going to plan, you're going to build a facility with one video format, with one type of infrastructure, and ever be able to plan for 6 years in advance. It's changing at a speed that is just uncompromised.
Correct.
So that's it. If you're here at the show still, come by our booth. We're happy to show you some of those things in hands-on. For those of you watching the video, thanks for the time, and please check out EVS for media infrastructure.
Thank you.
Steve, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you.